In today's episode, we're exploring the stories of 5 people who were eaten alive by snakes. From a pet owner whose financial desperation led to a fatal feeding mistake, to a wildlife rescuer who underestimated a protective mother python. But let's begin with the first story, where one man's overconfidence with his prized reticulated python cost him everything. It was April 18, 2016, and the humid Florida evening air hung heavy around the small strip mall in Jacksonville, where Tommy Valdez ran his exotic pet store. The shop, squeezed between a laundromat and the check-cashing business, had been his dream for nearly a decade, but lately it felt more like a nightmare. Inside, the familiar sounds of bubbling aquariums and rustling reptiles filled the cramped space, while fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of terrariums and snake enclosures. At 33, Tommy had been working with exotic reptiles for 9 years, building his reputation among collectors and enthusiasts throughout North Florida. His store specialized in rare snakes and lizards, catering to customers willing to pay premium prices for unusual specimens. But the exotic pet market had grown increasingly competitive, and recent months had been brutal for his small business. Online retailers were undercutting his prices, local regulations were tightening, and expensive veterinary bills had drained his savings account. The centerpiece of Tommy's collection was Titan, a massive female reticulated python he had acquired 3 years earlier as a juvenile. She had grown into a magnificent specimen, 22 feet of pure muscle and predatory instinct, weighing nearly 250 pounds. Tommy had turned down multiple offers from private collectors, but now, facing bankruptcy and mounting debts, he had finally agreed to sell her to a wealthy collector in Miami. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, capable of reaching lengths over 30 feet and weights exceeding 300 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, they're powerful constrictors known for their aggressive temperament and opportunistic feeding behavior. While not native to Florida, reticulated pythons were legal to keep in captivity with proper permits, making them popular among exotic pet owners and reptile dealers before Florida's Reptile of Concern laws were tightened in 2010. Unlike their more docile cousins, reticulated pythons retain their wild instincts even in captivity, viewing anything that moves as potential prey. Their strike speed is exceptional, and their constricting power can generate over 90 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bones and stop a human heart within minutes. That evening, Tommy had stayed late to prepare Titan for transport to her new owner, who was scheduled to pick her up the following morning. The massive python hadn't been fed in over 2 weeks, partly due to Tommy's financial constraints, and partly because he wanted her to be more manageable during the transfer. But hungry reticulated pythons are notoriously unpredictable, and Tommy's cost-cutting measures had eliminated the assistant who usually helped him handle the larger snakes. Tommy entered Titan's enclosure carrying a large shipping container, planning to coax the massive snake inside for transport. The python was coiled in the far corner of her custom-built habitat, her distinctive diamond-patterned scales catching the overhead lights. Her head was raised and alert, tongue flicking rapidly as she sensed Tommy's approach. The attack came with devastating swiftness. Titan struck like a coiled spring releasing, her massive head covering the distance between them faster than Tommy could react. Her powerful jaws clamped around his torso as her body began wrapping around him with terrifying efficiency. Tommy's startled cry was cut short as 250 pounds of muscle coiled around his chest and arms, the python's grip tightening with each breath he tried to take. The constriction was methodical and relentless. Titan's coils worked in waves, each loop of her body finding purchase around Tommy's ribcage, waist, and neck. The pressure was immense, far beyond what the human body could withstand. Tommy's ribs began cracking under the strain as the python's muscles contracted in powerful pulses, each squeezed tighter than the last. His struggles only triggered the snake's instincts to constrict harder, her grip becoming a deadly vice that compressed his chest cavity and cut off his air supply. Within minutes, Tommy's movement ceased as the python's crushing embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. But Titan wasn't finished. Over the next several hours, the massive snake began the slow, methodical process of consumption. Her jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as she worked Tommy's body head first into her throat. Tommy's body wasn't discovered until 3 days later, when regular customers found the store closed during normal business hours and called police for a welfare check. Officers discovered the gruesome scene in the back room. Titan coiled contently in her enclosure, her body grotesquely swollen from her massive meal, with only Tommy's legs still visible protruding from her jaws. The Jacksonville Police Department's investigation ruled the death accidental, citing improper handling procedures and the victim's decision to work alone with an extremely dangerous animal. Animal control officers removed all the reptiles from the store, with Titan being relocated to a licensed facility after veterinarians safely extracted Tommy's remains. Tommy's death sent shockwaves through Florida's exotic pet community, where he had been well known and respected despite his recent financial troubles. His funeral was attended by dozens of fellow dealers and collectors who remembered him as passionate but increasingly desperate in his final months. But Tommy wasn't the only expert who underestimated the deadly power of a massive python. Deep in the rainforest of Borneo, experienced jungle guide Ahmad Hassan was about to discover that even decades of experience meant nothing when facing a hungry, reticulated python. It was August 7, 2015, and the Borneo rainforest pulsed with life in the sweltering afternoon heat. Deep in the remote interior of Sarawak, Malaysia, where the jungle canopy blocked most sunlight and the air hung thick with moisture and the calls of exotic birds, experienced guide Ahmad Hassan moved carefully along an animal trail he had never explored before. The sounds of the rainforest surrounded him. The distant whoops of orangutans, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, and the constant buzz of insects. This was exactly the kind of pristine wilderness that drew adventure tourists from around the world, and Ahmad was always searching for new routes to offer his clients. At 41, Ahmad had been leading tourists through Borneo's rainforest for 15 years, building a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable and fearless guides in the region. He had survived encounters with king cobras, saltwater crocodiles, and aggressive orangutans, earning the respect of both clients and fellow guides. His intimate knowledge of jungle survival and animal behavior had saved lives on multiple occasions, and he took pride in his ability to handle any dangerous situation the rainforest could present. This solo scouting expedition was part of Ahmad's preparation for a new ecotourism route that would take adventurous clients deeper into the jungle than most tour operators dared to venture. He had been hiking for 3 hours, mapping GPS coordinates and noting potential campsites, when he encountered an obstacle that would test his jungle expertise in the most deadly way possible. Reticulated pythons are the apex predators of Southeast Asian rainforests, capable of growing to enormous sizes in the prey-rich environment of Borneo. These massive constrictors are ambush hunters that can remain motionless for hours before striking with explosive speed. They're excellent swimmers and climbers, equally at home in trees or water, and their hunting territory can span several square miles. When hungry or threatened, they become extremely aggressive, viewing any large, warm-blooded animal as potential prey. Blocking the narrow trail ahead was a massive male reticulated python, easily 19 feet long and as thick as a telephone pole. The snake was stretched across the path, his dark brown and gold patterns perfectly camouflaged against the fallen leaves and dappled sunlight. Ahmad estimated the pythons weighed over 300 pounds, making this one of the largest specimens he had encountered in his years of guiding. The snake appeared sluggish in the heat, but his head was raised and alert, tongue flicking as he sensed Ahmad's approach. Ahmad had encountered large pythons before and knew they were generally not aggressive toward humans unless threatened or extremely hungry. His usual procedure was to give them a wide berth and to find an alternate route, but the terrain here was too dense for easy detours, and he was eager to complete his survey before dark. Instead of retreating, he decided to encourage the snake to move by prodding it with a long stick, a technique that had worked with smaller pythons in the past. The python's response was immediate and devastating. The moment Ahmad's stick made contact, the massive snake exploded into motion with shocking speed. His enormous head whipped around and struck Ahmad in the chest, knocking him backward off the trail. Before Ahmad could recover, 300 pounds of muscle was wrapping around his body, the python's coils encircling his torso and legs with crushing force that drove the air from his lungs. The attack continued with methodical precision. The python's powerful body dragged Ahmad off the trail into dense undergrowth, where the snake's natural advantages became overwhelming. Ahmad's desperate attempts to reach his radio were cut short as the python's coils tightened around his chest, compressing his ribcage and making breathing impossible. The constriction increased with each of Ahmad's struggles, the snake's muscles responding to movement with increased pressure. Ahmad's ribs cracked audibly under the immense pressure as the python's grip tightened like a living vice. His spine compressed as the snake's coils worked their way around his neck and torso, cutting off blood flow to his brain while simultaneously crushing his internal organs. Within minutes, Ahmad's movement ceased as the massive python's embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The consumption process began immediately. The python's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as the snake began working Ahmad's body head first into its throat. The process took several hours, the python's elastic gullet expanding to accommodate prey much larger than its head. By dawn, Ahmad had disappeared entirely into the massive snake's digestive system. Ahmad's tour company began searching when he failed to return from his scouting expedition. Search teams found his GPS unit and torn clothing scattered along the trail a week later, but his body was never recovered. Local wildlife officials conducted a brief investigation, ruling his disappearance an occupational hazard of jungle guiding in remote areas. The incident prompted new safety protocols for tour operators in Sarawak, requiring guides to work in pairs when scouting remote areas, and to carry emergency beacons when venturing into unexplored territory. Ahmad's family received compensation from his employer's insurance policy, and a scholarship fund was established in his name for young Malaysians pursuing careers in ecotourism. But even trained researchers weren't immune to the deadly power of these massive constrictors. Dr. Lisa Park's academic pursuit of python behavior in the jungles of Sumatra would lead to an encounter that no amount of education could prepare her for. It was June 22, 2017, and the Indonesian rainforest of Sumatra shimmered in the oppressive tropical heat. Deep in the remote Lucer National Park, where ancient trees towered over a carpet of rotting vegetation and the air buzzed with the constant hum of insects, Dr. Lisa Park moved quietly through the undergrowth with the research equipment. The jungle around her was alive with the calls of gibbons and the rustle of small mammals, but Lisa's attention was focused entirely on tracking the behavior patterns of the forest's most formidable predator. At 28, Lisa was a graduate student in herpetology at the University of California, conducting field research for her PhD dissertation on python hunting behavior. She had been studying in Southeast Asia for 6 months, documenting the feeding patterns and territorial behavior of reticulated pythons in their natural habitat. Her research was groundbreaking, the first comprehensive study of how these massive constrictors adapted their hunting strategies to different prey species and environmental conditions. Lisa's methodology was unconventional and risky. While most researchers studied pythons from a safe distance using camera traps and radio telemetry, she preferred direct observation and hands-on data collection. She worked alone to avoid disturbing the snake's natural behavior, often spending days tracking individual specimens through dense jungle terrain. Her professors had expressed concerns about her methods, but Lisa's preliminary results were so promising that they had approved her continued solo fieldwork. Reticulated pythons in Sumatra grow to enormous sizes due to the abundance of prey and lack of natural predators. These apex constrictors are capable of taking prey as large as sun bears and orangutans, using their incredible strength and patience to ambush victims at water sources and game trails. They're most dangerous when they're hungry or protecting territory, and their feeding cycles can be unpredictable, with some individuals going months between meals before entering aggressive hunting states. That morning, Lisa had discovered what appeared to be the perfect research opportunity: a massive female reticulated python that had recently fed and was resting in a sunny clearing. The snake was enormous, easily 20 feet long and weighing an estimated 280 pounds, her body visibly swollen from a recent meal. Lisa assumed the python would be docile and sluggish after feeding, making this an ideal opportunity to collect measurements and behavioral data without disturbing the animal. Lisa approached the python slowly, her camera and measuring equipment ready, believing the snake's post-feeding state would make her safe to observe at close range. She had studied python behavior extensively and knew that recently fed snakes typically showed little interest in additional prey. But as she moved closer, positioning herself for photographs and measurements, she failed to recognize the subtle signs that this python's feeding was incomplete. The attack was swift and unexpected. The python, still driven by active feeding instincts, struck at Lisa with explosive force when she moved within range. The massive snake's head slammed into her chest, knocking her to the ground as 280 pounds of muscle began wrapping around her body. Lisa's equipment scattered as the python's coils encircled her torso and legs, the snake's grip tightening with each breath she tried to take. The python's powerful body dragged Lisa toward a nearby stream, where the snake could use the water to help manage its oversized prey. Lisa's desperate attempts to reach her radio were cut short as the python's coils compressed her chest, making breathing impossible. The constriction was methodical and relentless, each loop of the snake's body finding purchase around her rib cage and neck. Lisa's ribs cracked under the immense pressure as the python's muscles contracted in powerful waves. The snake's grip became a deadly vice that compressed her chest cavity and cut off blood flow to her brain. Her struggles only triggered the python's instincts to constrict harder, the massive snake responding to movement with increased pressure. Within minutes, Lisa's movement ceased as the python's crushing embrace stopped her heart. The consumption process began in the shallow water, where the python could use buoyancy to help swallow prey much larger than its head. The snake's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as it began working Lisa's body into its throat. The process took most of the day, the python's elastic gullet expanding to accommodate its massive meal. Lisa's research team began searching when she failed to return to base camp that evening. They found her waterlogged equipment floating in the stream 2 days later. but her body was never recovered. Local authorities conducted a brief investigation, ruling her disappearance an accident related to dangerous wildlife research. The University of California established new safety protocols requiring all field researchers to work in pairs when studying large predators, and Lisa's preliminary research was published posthumously, contributing valuable data to the scientific understanding of python behavior. Her family established a memorial scholarship for young women pursuing careers in herpetology. But academic researchers aren't the only ones who underestimate these deadly serpents. In the shadowy world of illegal animal trafficking, Carlos Mendez was about to discover that cutting corners with dangerous snakes could have fatal consequences. It was October 12, 2014, and the abandoned warehouse in Miami's industrial district sat silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the cavernous space, rows of makeshift enclosures housed some of the world's most dangerous reptiles, their presence hidden from authorities by layers of false permits and forged documentation. The air was thick with the smell of reptile musk and the constant hum of heating systems, while shadows danced across concrete walls lined with terrariums and snake cages. This was Carlos Mendez's domain, a carefully concealed operation that smuggled exotic animals into the lucrative American black market. At 36, Carlos had been involved in the illegal exotic animal trade for 8 years, building a network of suppliers and buyers that stretched from Miami to New York. His operation specialized in rare and dangerous species that legitimate dealers couldn't or wouldn't handle: venomous snakes, massive constrictors, and protected species that commanded premium prices from wealthy collectors. Carlos had survived numerous close calls with deadly animals, developing a reputation for fearlessness that bordered on recklessness. His overconfidence had grown with each successful deal, leading him to take increasingly dangerous shortcuts. The warehouse held dozens of illegal specimens, but none was more valuable or more dangerous than the massive male African rock python he had recently acquired from a contact in Nigeria. The 18-foot snake was worth over $50,000 to the right buyer, but it had proven to be extremely aggressive and difficult to handle. African rock pythons are among the most aggressive python species in the world, known for their unpredictable temperament and incredible strength. Native to sub-Saharan Africa, they are apex predators capable of taking prey as large as antelopes and young crocodiles. Unlike their more docile Asian cousins, African rock pythons retain their wild instincts even after years in captivity, viewing humans as potential threats or prey. Their constricting power can generate over 100 pounds of pressure per square inch, and their strike speed is faster than most people can react to. That night, Carlos had arranged to deliver the python to a private collector in Orlando who was willing to pay cash with no questions asked. The buyer was scheduled to arrive at dawn, giving Carlos only a few hours to sedate the massive snake and prepare it for transport. To save money and avoid involving additional people in the illegal transaction, Carlos had decided to handle the dangerous procedure alone. Carlos entered the python's enclosure carrying a syringe loaded with veterinary sedative, planning to inject the snake and then transfer it to a shipping container. The 200-pound python was coiled in the corner of its reinforced cage, its dark brown and gold patterns making it nearly invisible in the dim lighting. The snake's head was raised and alert, its muscular body tensed for action. The attack was instantaneous and overwhelming. The moment Carlos stepped within striking range, the massive python launched itself across the enclosure with explosive force. Its enormous head slammed into Carlos's chest, knocking him backward against the cage wall as 200 pounds of muscle began wrapping around his body. The syringe flew from his hand as the python's coils encircled his torso and arms, the snake's grip tightening with crushing force. The constriction was methodical and relentless. The python's powerful body worked in waves, each loop finding purchase around Carlos' ribcage, waist, and neck. Carlos's ribs began cracking under the strain as the snake's muscles contracted in powerful pulses, each squeeze tighter than the last. His desperate struggles only triggered the python's instincts to constrict harder. Carlos's screams echoed through the empty warehouse as the python's grip became a deadly vice that compressed his chest cavity and cut off his air supply. Within minutes, Carlos's movement ceased as the massive python's embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. Then the consumption process began. The python's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision, stretching impossibly wide as the snake began working Carlos's body head first into its throat. Carlos's business partner discovered the gruesome scene 2 days later when Carlos failed to show up for their planned meeting. The investigation uncovered the entire smuggling operation, leading to multiple arrests and the seizure of dozens of illegal animals. But not all deadly encounters with giant snakes involve illegal activities. In the Florida Everglades, wildlife control specialist Mark Johnson was about to discover that even legitimate python removal could turn deadly when proper precautions were ignored. It was February 14, 2013, and the Florida Everglades stretched endlessly under the pale winter sun. A vast wilderness of sawgrass marshes and cypress swamps that had become ground zero for one of America's most devastating ecological disasters. Deep in the backcountry of the national park, where airboat trails disappeared into maze-like channels and cell phone signals vanished entirely, wildlife control specialist Mark Johnson tracked his most dangerous quarry through the shallow waters and dense vegetation. At 44, Mark had been hunting invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades for 5 years as part of the state's aggressive removal program. These massive Asian constrictors, originally released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, had established a breeding population that was devastating native wildlife throughout South Florida. Mark took pride in capturing the snakes alive for research purposes rather than killing them outright, believing that studying their behavior patterns could help develop more effective control strategies. Recent months have been difficult for Mark personally. A messy divorce had left him financially strained and emotionally isolated, leading him to take on more dangerous solo assignments to maximize his earnings from the state bounty program. His colleagues had expressed concerns about his increasingly reckless approach to python capture, but Mark's success rate was impressive, and he had developed techniques for single-handedly subduing snakes that most specialists wouldn't attempt without backup. Burmese pythons in the Everglades have grown to enormous sizes due to the subtropical climate and abundant prey. These apex predators have virtually no natural enemies in Florida, allowing them to reach lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. Female pythons are particularly dangerous during breeding season, when they become extremely aggressive in defending their nests and territory. Their constricting power can crush the bones of large mammals, and their patient hunting style makes them nearly impossible to detect until they strike. That morning, Mark had received reports of an unusually large python sighting in the remote area of the park where several endangered bird species were nesting. The snake had been spotted by researchers who estimated its length at over 17 feet, making it one of the largest specimens reported in the area. Mark saw this as an opportunity to capture a prize specimen that could provide valuable research data while earning him a substantial bounty payment. Mark tracked the massive female python to a secluded hammock surrounded by shallow water and dense vegetation. The snake was enormous, easily 17 feet long and weighing an estimated 220 pounds. Her golden brown patterns perfectly camouflaged against the dry grass and palmetto fronds. She was coiled near what appeared to be a nest site, her massive head raised in alert as she sensed Mark's approach through the swamp. Mark approached the python without proper capture equipment, believing his experience would allow him to subdue her using improvised techniques he had developed over years of solo hunting. He failed to recognize the signs that this was a protective mother defending her nest. The aggressive posturing, the way she tracked his movements, the subtle coiling that preceded a defensive strike. His overconfidence had blinded him to the extreme danger he was walking into. The attack came with devastating swiftness. The protective mother python struck at Mark with explosive force, her massive head slamming into his chest and knocking him backward into the shallow water. Before he could recover, 220 pounds of muscle was wrapping around his body, the snake's coils encircling his torso and legs with crushing force that drove the air from his lungs. The python's powerful body dragged Mark deeper into the swamp, where the snake could use the water and vegetation to help overpower her prey. Mark's desperate attempts to reach his radio were cut short as the python's coils tightened around his chest, compressing his ribcage and making breathing impossible. The constriction increased with each of Mark's struggles, the snake's muscles responding to the movement with increased pressure. Mark's ribs cracked audibly under the immense pressure as the python's grip tightened like a living vice. His spine compressed as the snake's coils worked their way around his neck, cutting off blood flow to his brain while simultaneously crushing his internal organs. The murky swamp water made his struggles even more desperate as he fought against both the python's crushing embrace and the threat of drowning. Within minutes, Mark's movements ceased as the massive python's constriction stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The snake maintained her grip for nearly an hour, ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized before beginning the slow process of consumption. The python's jaws unhinged with mechanical precision as she began working Mark's body into her throat, using the buoyancy of the water to help swallow prey much larger than her head. Mark's airboat was discovered empty by park rangers several hours later when he failed to check in at his scheduled time. Despite extensive searches involving helicopters, tracking dogs, and dozens of volunteers, his body was never recovered. The massive python had likely consumed him entirely and retreated deeper into the vast swampland, leaving no trace of her victim. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission conducted a thorough investigation, ruling Mark's disappearance an occupational hazard of python removal work in remote areas. New safety protocols were implemented, requiring python hunters to work in pairs and carry emergency beacons when operating in isolated locations. Mark's death sent shockwaves through Florida's python removal community, where he was remembered as skilled but increasingly reckless in his final months. His ex-wife received his life insurance payout, and a memorial fund was established to support the families of wildlife control specialists killed in the line of duty. Thanks for watching. Just when you think you understand the deadly power of these massive constrictors, we're just getting started. Click the next video to see why some of nature's most beautiful serpents are also its most lethal killers.